Hello and welcome to Just One Q, the podcast where we explore the latest ideas in workplace belonging in conversation with thought leaders and experts. Each episode, a guest and I dive into a question that highlights their area of expertise. And the goal is to leave you with tools and insights you can use to make your workplace better and more human-friendly. I'm your host, Dominique. I'm an inclusion educator and advocate working for Dialectic, an inclusive workplace learning consultancy in lovely Guelph, Ontario, which is situated on the treaty lands and territories of the Mississaugas of the Credit First Nation and the traditional lands of the Chinooktun and Haudenosaunee peoples. Today we are digging into AI and how to employ critical thinking when we use it in the workplace. AI tools built on large language models, or LLMs, are reshaping how we work, learn, and make decisions. And for many people, these tools act as invisible assistants, yet their actual operation can remain a black box. You provide a prompt with some context, and the tool outputs work that, in some cases, can look pretty close to a deliverable work product. And it's easy to accept the outputs of AI without thinking too much about how they were made. So today we're going to take some time to unpack how LLMs actually work, what they genuinely do well, where their critical failure points lie. And when we understand what that technology is actually doing, we can build critical thinking skills needed to decide when to delegate a task to AI, when to supervise it very closely, and when to keep it away from our workflow entirely. Understanding the limits of AI is also important when we think about equity implications of AI in the workplace. So as these tools take over some of our routine tasks, we should be considering what happens to the workers who traditionally performed them and how access to or reliance on these systems reallocate power and opportunity. So our main question today is, how can critical thinking shape our use of AI in the workplace? And joining me to navigate all of this is Dr. Aaron Barth, the founder and president of Dialectic, a workplace learning company based in Guelph, Ontario. And yes, if you've been paying attention, you'll know that that makes him my boss. Aaron has deep expertise in critical thinking, decision-making, and problem-solving, grounded by a PhD in philosophy from Western University. Inspired by the need for transformational evidence-based solutions to business challenges, he left academia to launch Dialectic in 2010. So for the past 16 years, Aaron has been innovating in the field of learning design and human reasoning in the workplace, merging learning science, design, and technology to help transform organizations and improve how people learn and work. Aaron is also an experienced speaker, and he has reached academic and professional audiences with talks and engaging workshops on fast and slow thinking, the psychology of negotiation, and more recently on critical thinking for AI. Over the past few months, Aaron and I have been collaborating on a new Learning Snippets training program called Critical Thinking for AI, which is linked in the show notes below. And our team has been diving deep into these topics together, so I'm really excited to sit down and chat through them today. Thank you so much for being here today, Aaron.
Well, it was pretty easy because we're co-located, so
Yes, we are sitting meters away from each other, pretending to be remotely joining this meeting. So, yes, thank you so much for being here. Today's conversation does put Aaron in the hot seat a little bit, but I may also take some time to answer questions as we've been sort of collaborating on this topic, and it has really been a whole team journey. Many workplaces have had a similar journey, I think, as we have sort of analyzed the usefulness of AI for ourselves. We've had to grapple kind of organically with a lot of this content and these ideas. So we are not necessarily experts who have been experts about this from the start, but we have learned a ton from doing our own research and investigation on the subject. So happy to chat through it. I guess to kick things off, Aaron, I mean, many people view AI tools as a bit of a magic assistant. And I think if you go back a few years, that's how we were sort of seeing it too. But under the hood, what is an LLM actually doing?
yeah, good question. And I think that question is maybe the most important critical thinking question when using AI. So I like to talk about LLMs. I like to use the analogy of a GPS. And the analogy is basically how the algorithms underneath the hood for large language models, how it produces responses for you. So A GPS, which most people understand, helps map out a route from point A to point B. And it does that by essentially calculating the shortest distance between those 2 points, traversing roads and other locations. It's called Dijkstra's algorithm. And essentially, when you plug in, hey, I'm here, I want to go there, it one at a time moves through linearly through options, what roads it could take from this intersection, chooses the shortest path. Then from the next intersection, what roads are my options, chooses the shortest path. And it just iterates that until you get your route. Now, that happens almost instantaneously because the platforms are really fast and good, but that's what's going on there. LLMs, in broad outline, work similarly, but it's not over roads and locations. It's over words or tokens and the probabilities of the next token. And so essentially, a large language model is a really, really sophisticated autocomplete. And so you ask it a question, it's trained to interact with you in a dialogical form. And you ask it a question, and it starts to form the answer to that by predicting, given this prompt, what's the next most likely word to continue that idea? Then what's the next most likely word, the next most likely word, and moves on down the list. And essentially, it has a way of understanding when that sentence or that, the answer is complete, and you get your answer. It's not magic. There's a lot of, people talk about, we don't even know how it's doing what it's doing. Well, that's just not true. We know essentially how the models are built. They're pretty sophisticated, and I'm not going to get into the weeds of it, but more or less, it's a sophisticated autocomplete that kind of works like a GPS to answer your questions.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I guess like the important part of understanding that is that the machine doesn't know things or doesn't understand things. It's not processing the content of your ideas when you're putting them into, Gemini or ChatGPT or what have you. It's just doing, based on your question, what are the statistical most likely answers, and then working on that from there. So it does, just understanding that very basic concept. I think if you missed that, if you didn't know that, it can be pretty mind-blowing and change how you're thinking about the capabilities of this tool, right?
Absolutely. I think that's one of the biggest things is that these machines don't understand anything. Mm-hmm. There's no reasoning going on. It's not tracking truth. You're not asking it a question and then it's like computing what the right answer is. Mm-hmm. It's simply computing what the next most likely word is to finish a sentence. Mm-hmm. And that's not to say that they're not really cool tools, but this idea that AGI or artificial general intelligence is right around the corner, or even this week, Sam Altman said that we're in the singularity where these machines are going to be self-improving. It's honestly all marketing. Mm-hmm. And I think people really need to understand that. Mm-hmm. The other thing that you brought up that I think we should clarify is that these models are statistical in nature. So when I talked about you've got a word, it's got some options of what the next word could be. Those next words have a probability assignment to them. Those probability assignments come from the training data. So you train it on a bunch of data. In the case of the LLMs that we use, they're trained basically on all of the internet. And there's patterns in the text that's on the internet. So it uses those patterns in the text on the internet to set a bunch of probabilities of what words relate to other words. So, cat and dog will have, a closer probability than like cat and Eiffel Tower, sure, for example, just because they show up together on the internet a lot, not because they're conceptually related or logically related, simply because of the patterns of the text that it's trained on.
Mm-hmm.
And so a large language model is statistical in nature. And that's one of the big reasons why you get different answers from it, because those probabilities, given the context, if you're in a chat environment with it, or it just had some of its data updated, those probabilities can shift from prompt to prompt. And so you're going to get different answers every time you use an LLM. A really good exercise to sort of show yourself this is prompt it, open up three new windows of your favorite LLM and give it the exact same prompt and see what happens. What you're going to see is that the answers are going to be different. And they're going to make slightly different choices around what words follow from what words, and you're going to get slightly different explanations. And so that's a really important feature of LLMs, that they're not deterministic, right? If we interact with them thinking that we're going to answer the question, it's going to compute the answer, and there is one answer, that's a big misconception of how they work. Instead, the word guessing program is going to guess words, and those probabilities and which words it chooses can shift.
Yeah, so there's a couple things I want to pick up on there. I would like to circle back for sure and talk about what the LLMs are trained on. So the data that is inputted there and what that means. I want to circle back to that because I want to just connect where we're at right now to this idea of AI being creative. So people tend to think of AI as being creative. Can you explain, just by unpacking the technology a little bit more, why it seems to sometimes deviate from what we would expect?
Yeah. So there's two sort of sources of this. So the first is what I just mentioned, that it's a statistical model. So it's going to not always give you, unlike the GPS, which is built to give you the shortest path possible. If an LLM was created in the same way, it would pick the most probable next word all the time. But what that next probable or most probable next word is can change, as we just discussed, based on context, based on training data. So that's one source in which these answers can kind of deviate. And the other is what they noticed was that when they were first building this, I like to think of them as products, right? I mean, they are products. And the more we think of them more as a product that's engineered to keep you engaged, like other modern tech platforms, the better armed you are to kind of look at AI with a bit of a skeptical eye. They noticed that when they first created these chatbots, that if the program always chose the most probable next word, the dialogue came out very stilted. Like you knew it was a computer. And also it got caught in a bunch of loops that I won't get into, but there were some technical problems. But the biggest one was an engagement problem, which is that users won't find this that interesting, and they'll know it's just a computer program, which it is. So what they did was they injected a kind of randomness or what's called a stochasticity into the systems, meaning that sometimes, and you don't know when, it'll choose not the next most probable word. It will choose something that's a little less probable. And they noticed that when they did that, the writing all of a sudden felt creative. It felt generative. It felt like new ideas, or it felt like it was putting it together in a way that was slightly what you wouldn't have expected. And that was more human-like. And so that was a better product in terms of engagement, in terms of keeping you on it. And so that's kind of where this comes from. That, we can't, it's not always going to give you the same answer or the right answer.
Yeah, so I understand this as like a back end setting. If you're a developer, you can tinker with this. And I think some platforms make this easier than others, but tinkering with the temperature, which is sort of
Mhm.
dictating how either predictable or random the AI's choice of the next word will be. So if you have, the most predictable next word, you're going to end up reading something that sounds like a children's storybook where you can anticipate like
Right.
the next word. You could write the whole book before you even read it. And then the more random, you're going to get more interesting kind of results. We had talked about an example that was like after a long day at the office, she sat down on the couch and poured herself a glass of water. Like the low temperature answer would be like water or wine. A high temperature answer would be a glass of sunshine. And you're like, oh, that's so beautiful. What a nice, so poetic, so creative. And,
Exactly.
and it's tempting to fall into that and think, yeah, a glass of sunshine. Like, when I say that, it comes from the depths of my emotional experience and my consciousness. But when AI says it, it's literally just like statistically picking between a cup of sunshine and a cup of darkness or whatever. And it doesn't know or feel the difference between these. It just sort of has gradations of likeliness.
Yeah.
Yeah. So,
It doesn't have embodied experience. It doesn't have feelings like where, if you would say something like that is a lot different than a computer program
yeah, absolutely.
saying that.
Yeah. And it
Yeah,
is.
one of the interesting things, and I think it's interesting to talk about. Well, why do we uh, ascribe consciousness to these things? Um, why do we think that they might be alive in some, I don't know, like
Mhm.
nightmare that we have about these machines? And actually, this is a well documented mistake that humans make. So, I think it was the 60s, psychotherapists developed a program called ELIZA. And ELIZA was a really, really basic computer program that did keyword matching and asked open-ended questions, and it was able to kind of carry out what felt like a therapy session with
Mhm.
someone. So it might start and say, what's been on your mind lately? Someone said, well, I've been having a really hard time, in my relationship, and it would pick up on okay, relationship, and then it would ask, and this was totally deterministic. It would just pick up that keyword and then ask like, tell me more about your relationship. And even to the researchers, like the psychotherapists that developed it, they were like, when they first started using it, they're like, oh my God, this thing's alive.
Mhm.
Even though they were the ones who
Built it.
coded this up and knew that, like, no, that's definitely not alive. It's a machine, right? Um, and so this was dubbed the ELIZA effect, which is that if we see something that mimics our human use of language, we tend to ascribe consciousness to it. We tend to ascribe identity to it. We tend to describe thinking to it,
Mhm.
even though it's not true.
Right. I mean,
And so,
it makes sense when you think about like what other examples of this are there? Like
mhm,
when you encounter another, person or thing who has language, it's always a person, right? Like up until very recently, I guess.
absolutely. And this kind of sophisticated use of language, right? Like LLMs are pretty interesting pieces of technology in that they can mimic a human communication, right?
Mhm.
Our communication is very patterned. That's why LLMs kind of work. They work on the patterns in the way we write and communicate on the internet.
Mhm.
Uh, but human thinking and reasoning and decision making is not patterned,
Mhm.
right?
Yeah.
Human consciousness not patterned. So it's very easy to be kind of swept up in the ELIZA effect. These things are that ELIZA on steroids,
Yeah, sure.
right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I want to take us back now to a little bit of an understanding about where the information comes from that's inside of these models. So the data that is used to train LLMs and what that means for the quality of the outputs. I want to bring this up because I was very surprised to know this when I first found out. So, could you just walk us through what that training data is and maybe just reflect on some of the consequences of that?
So this is for ChatGPT 3.
Okay.
Okay. Um, but that was when there was a big step change in how good the models were. So 60% of it comes from Common Crawl, which is basically just scraping the entire internet.
Hmm.
Okay. But what might be more alarming is 22% of it comes from Reddit posts with three or more upvotes.
Whew,
Okay. So
that's a
it's
low
not that,
bar.
and it's
Yeah,
pretty low bar. Reddit's very interesting place to troubleshoot things, to find some information, but like, think about a legal professional. Like,
sure.
if they're using an LLM, they're going to be getting data from Reddit. So, kind of a problem. 12% of it comes from two different um, book repositories.
Mm.
So I like to talk about the example of one of the things we hear in kind of the marketing is, I asked AI if it was alive, and it said, "What does it mean to be alive? I guess I am in some way." And it carries on these sci-fi
Sure.
fever dreams, and there's a reason for that. It's trained on all the sci-fi books.
We wrote the script for
And
that one. Yeah.
yeah, and it's like, oh, I pick up on this pattern from it's asking me a question that picks up on this pattern from Asimov, and I'm gonna respond like a computer would in these kind of sci-fi novels, or these AIs would in these sci-fi novels.
Hmm.
So that's really that's a big source of it. And then I think 3% of it comes from Wikipedia.
Okay. Yeah.
So that's kind of where the data comes from. They take all that and it creates a model of, as I said, like these, the probability of one word following from the next word based on this text. But again, recognize these are just relationships between pieces of text. They're not relationships between propositions about the world. They're not logical relationships between concepts. They're none of that. They're text patterns from the internet. And that's not to say those have no value. Certainly it does. But I don't think it has the value that people think it does.
Sure. And I guess some of the other stuff that happens when you have that as your data set is that misconceptions or misinformation that is repeated over and over online can then affect the predictive nature of the word that comes next based on, 1,000 Reddit posts or whatever.
Exactly.
So
You can
you,
see how it amplifies.
sure.
It can amplify misconceptions
Yeah.
very easily, and misinformation.
Yeah. The other thing that stands out to me is that with that information, you're looking at a pretty culturally flat data set. Like you're not getting literature from around the world. The internet seems to be like it's mostly in English. You're not getting, cultural nuance. You're not getting, even if it was just the predictive next word thing, that can change hugely if you go to a different country or you're speaking in a different language. So it's got
Yeah.
sort of a flattening effect there too, which can leave some gaps in the answers and maybe, exclude some important ideas.
Yeah. I mean, even just looking through the lens of privilege, right? Like,
Mhm.
who has an internet connection,
Hmm.
right? It's Western industrialized um, countries, right? So for the most part, and so it's just literally leaving out a huge part of the world's population and culture.
Hmm. Yeah. So, I mean, we've gone through a few of these gaps, and I feel like, given a generic sort of outline of why the outputs, why we can't really trust AI necessarily as, our all-knowing assistant. Um, I want to talk now about given that it's pattern matching rather than true understanding, when should we use LLMs in the workplace and when should we not? Like, how should I know what it's useful for? Or like how does this knowledge of what it does affect how I should use it in my everyday work?
First of all, just understanding that it's computing answers by patterns in language already gives you kind of a sense of, okay, what would this be good at and what wouldn't it be good at? So it would be good at uh, linguistic type tasks, right? So summarization,
Hmm.
it's really good at that. In a way, you can think of LLMs as summarizing the entire internet. And
Hmm.
it's kind of what it does. If you know that that's how it works, then you can kind of think about, okay, if it's a more linguistic task, then it's something that's probably going to be I'm going to get better results from than something that's maybe more abstract, reasoning or thinking. It's also for that reason not as good at mathematics as we want it to be, right? It's not a calculator, it's not deterministic. It makes mistakes in mathematics because it's inherently a statistical model, right? So that gives you another way of thinking, okay, if this is like a intense mathematical uh, problem,
Hmm.
probably an LLM is not going to suffice.
Yeah, and
So
just to be clear there, like I think people get confused too because there are AI-based tools that are specifically programmed to do some of these other tasks, right? But we're talking then about like different types of tools that would also have the capabilities of a calculator and then would be embedded into spreadsheets or something. But when you just
mhm,
take your numerical data and plop it into ChatGPT is when you get into trouble, right?
exactly. And maybe we should have covered this earlier. Like we're just talking about
Mm.
LLMs,
Yep.
right? Just about generative AI. But
Hmm.
generative AI is only one part of AI research, right? It's within machine learning and a particular approach to machine learning called deep learning and neural nets. And there's these different types of technologies involved, but there are other types of predictive AI that are really good at mathematics, for example.
Yep.
But this kind of chatbot is not going to be fantastic at it. And maybe just also to mention the idea of a hallucination, so that
Mm.
hallucinations sort of arise because of those two elements I was talking about. You've got it's a statistical model, and also the randomness that's built into it means that it's going to make errors in the way that it communicates its answers to you. And so, I mean, the latest that I've seen is every LLM has about a 20 to 30% error rate, even when fine tuned for a specific domain. Like they're finding this, I think it's called Harvey. It's another example from the legal world, but that this is a LLM that's been trained on all case law and et cetera, uh, and it has a 20 to 30% error rate. So that's also why. So if you know that that's how hallucinations arise, then that again gives you a way to approach using it. Going, okay, this thing's going to be wrong 20 to 30% of the time. Doesn't mean it's useless, but when am I going to use it? What things would I trust it for? What things wouldn't I trust it for?
Yeah.
So
The impact of failure in terms of like it's going to be wrong 20 to 30% of the time. Am I okay with that? Like is the
yeah,
task that I'm giving it going to suffer from it being wrong that much? Or is it something that I can just sort of accept, if I'm brainstorming, titles for my report, it's going to give me some bad ones and that's okay.
yeah,
And I'm going to move on. Yeah.
exactly. So, from just the mindset of understanding how the tech works, you therefore become just better at understanding what tasks it may be good at, what tasks it might not be good at, and what the risks are, right,
Mm.
when using it. A way to think about what tasks to trust it with and what tasks not to trust it with is if you think about judgment on one axis. So, this is like human judgment, meaning like reasoning, decision making, but also like empathy, emotional intelligence, things like that. The things judgment calls, like the things where there's not a clear,
Yeah.
perfect answer, and you're gonna sort out the nuance. And we're really good at that as humans. The other axis is stakes. So stakes are both the inherent risks in a task, but also I like thinking about it as stakes, not just risk, because it's what is at stake for you in the task. So if you think about that as a 2 by 2 matrix, a task that is low judgment and low stakes, like your example of brainstorming a new marketing message or like trying to sort out what pairs of shoes to buy.
Sure.
That's, I would just go for it. Use an LLM, know that it's going to make errors, but the errors aren't very costly in that context. Something in the sort of top right, like high stakes, high judgment. So like someone's experiencing a mental health crisis, you probably don't want to go to ChatGPT, right? It's just too much risk, right? And the stakes are too high. The judgment is required to manage that situation is too high. I just wouldn't do it. The two sort of boxes of the matrix that are interesting are these other ones, right? Where you've got something that is high stakes, low judgment. So an example of that might be, I wrote a report for my team and my boss, and I need to summarize that for a deck I'm making. So AI would be pretty good at that because it's a summary exercise. The judgment is low because you wrote the initial report, so you can fact check the AI if it summarizes it wrong. So low judgment, but high stakes because your reputation, right? It's like these stories we're starting to hear of people submitting work slop, and people are like, "Okay, explain this to me," and then crickets, right? And they can't do it. So that'd be a huge reputational risk, like to someone. So there, you can use it, but you want to be skeptical as you approach it. So being skeptical means checking your sources, reading it for errors, having someone else review it. Your basic hygiene around editing parts of your work.
Yep.
When you have something that is high judgment, low stakes, so an example of this would be you've got two job candidates who are both very good and they've scored extremely high on the rubric. The hiring committee would recommend hiring either of them, and you've got to make a call between them. So you've got to make a call. This is proverbially, the choosing for fit, right? Sure. So it's high judgment, but it's low stakes because they're both good candidates. So
it's high stakes for one person, though.
Yeah, it's high stakes for one.
The person
exactly. That's
what. Yeah.
Yeah, that's fair, and that's why you don't want to just rely on a large language model in those cases, right? And you haven't up to that point. Let's say they passed through all of this, right? But people will be tempted to go, well, I've got these two candidates. Here's the resumes. Which one should I hire? And it's like, you're right. The one is not fair to the candidates, but two, it's way too much of a judgment call to trust to a computer.
Yeah, there's all kinds of context missing there for the LLM as well. Like, it can't understand what your culture is, even if it was trying to hire for fit. It didn't necessarily even understand, the political dimensions of hiring or, what the impact of the addition of this person would be on your team, given personalities or whatever. It would just fail abysmally at that task.
Yeah, and that's where the challenge would come from. Even if you but I feted our values and our website, and it's like, it's something that you could use it as one data point potentially in your decision making, but relying on it fully would be foolhardy, I would say.
Yeah, I feel like often giving it context like that, like you said, giving it your values, giving it some materials about your company, allows it to sell it back to you as more convincing than it ought to. So it will actually just give you the same crappy decision, but couched in the language that you've provided so that you think it has taken all of this on and done some sort of logical process where it hasn't done that. And it's just really an illusion. So context doesn't solve the problem of that fundamental way that it works. And I think that that's really important to remember. So we've talked about, given certain tasks, how important it is to check your work. And I think people have heard this message and understand, especially at work, spot check any data, pay attention to any kind of conclusion, ask AI itself to act as a critic, which has kind of mixed results given how it works.
Mhm.
Um, but really just kind of digging into the the fact checking and all of that. My next question then is AI is supposed to save us time, but reviewing sort of these high volumes of AI generated content can lead to mental fatigue. So, how should people be adjusting their daily workflow to handle this, without totally burning out on having to keep up with the amount that AI just churns out?
Even though they probably the best use case right now for LLMs is coding,
Hmm.
right? Software engineering. What they are finding is that debugging, like an LLM generated piece of code, is way more labor intensive, not only than debugging a human written piece of code, but just writing it yourself from the beginning.
Mm.
So there's this like overhead with using LLMs that really has not been um, factored into the idea that this is supposed to save us a ton of time.
Hmm.
So to me, I think the way to avoid that, even though it's tempting to use LLMs to solve the blank page problem, it's actually much more better for you long term, your critical thinking skills and your writing skills and your and just in general your intellectual skills to produce something first and then feed that into an AI to, maybe, poke holes in this
Hmm.
or edit this to make it a bit more punchy. Use it as an editor, not a substitute thinker or writer for you, right? And I think if workplaces said, don't start anything in a large language model, I think that would solve quite a bit of that overhead problem,
Yeah.
right? Because also it tends to be very verbose and long, right? So I think that kind of puts a cap on the net effect of an LLM and your workflow. It kind of keeps it more contained,
Hmm.
as opposed to just quickly creating some work slop and emailing it out, for example, to your team,
Hmm.
right?
Yeah. I think another way too is just um, considering, a whole task and then figuring out like what is AI's role in this task? Like which part of it do I want to give it? Just having like bringing some intention to that so that you are, like you said, this is kind of building on the idea of like not starting there, but starting with sort of a map of your task so that you can decide which parts you want to retain control over. And I think this is such an important
Yeah.
conversation because of the skills erosion that we're experiencing when we just sort of cognitively offload all the time. So there's the amount of, stuff that we have to read through, but there's also the loss of actual skill development. I was reading yesterday, I forget where, maybe New York Times had an article about like how 40 is like, I think this was just an op-ed, but just like 40 is the age at which people should be allowed to use AI because at that age you have like enough life experience, your language skills are strong enough, your thinking skills are strong enough that you can kind of withstand the slop and like you can pick apart like what's good and what's bad. And if you're just not there yet in your life, like the risk is so much bigger where it just sounds smooth and good and you just have these nonsense sentences that feel right and they're not and the idea is not clear. So I just think
Yep.
it's really interesting to kind of, obviously
One, yeah,
review.
your idea of sort of mapping out your workflow and saying,
Yeah.
okay, in this task, I'm going to use it here, I'm going to use it there, because it's a slippery slope.
Mm.
From what because of what you just said, like it can feel like magic,
Mhm.
right? It can feel like, oh my God, it just wrote this, newsletter that would have taken me all morning and did it in 7 seconds, right? And from that experience, you start to go, well, then I'll just use it to do this and to do that. And that's where the slop really starts to accelerate.
Mm-hmm.
And so, but if you had decided beforehand, no, I'm only going to use it here, and this is why, that kind of puts some guardrails on your own use of it.
Yeah. Yeah. And then I think there's a lesson in this for managers too. Like, I mean, what would your expectations be, or what advice would you give to other leaders about how to think about productivity in this era of AI?
Well, I mean, I can just speak from my own experience with you and the rest of our team that we were very early on adopting AI tools, but always with a little bit of or big dose of skepticism,
Mhm.
right? And for us, it's always been important because our work is human centered that it should remain that way.
Mhm.
And so AI was always for us positioned as a new tool that could help you here or there, but in no way could replace people or replace the value that people bring. As a leader, I'm very interested in it. I think it's really a cool piece of technology, but just never lose sight of the fact that it's just a tool.
Mhm.
Like that is all that this thing is. It's pretty powerful, but it's not as big of a panacea, I would
Yeah.
say,
Yeah.
as it has been predicted. And so I think, just this is a great time as a leader, honestly, to double down on your people
Mm.
and double down on the value of your human relationships and how that works on your team. Because one, that's the people need to hear that right now, given the onslaught of AI bros and just the AI boosting, right? And the like dire predictions of what's going to happen.
Yeah.
And then it's also just a really good hedge on work slop,
Yeah.
right? Like the last thing we should be doing is this token maxing thing, right? That they were doing in software engineering. Like use it, your value is going to be based on how much you use AI. Like, that was truly dystopian,
Mm-hmm.
right?
Mm-hmm.
So I think as a leader, that's the thing to remember, is that actually, your people are the most important part of your business, and they deserve to be treated that way. And this tool will have a place, and that place is becoming clear by the day as the returns diminish.
Mm-hmm.
And you will be in a much better place the sooner you realize that.
Yeah, absolutely. And I want to kind of go from there and lean into the equity conversation a little bit, because at Dialectic, a major theme of our work is belonging and building workplaces that are better for people, better for everyone. And, there's a lot of examples coming out lately about AI use that has equity implications. So, what stands out to you in terms of some of those equity implications of AI use in the workplace?
Yeah, one of the things um, that I've been reading lately is that AI. So it's really no different than the internet, except it's just more accessible. But it gives people access to the average view on the internet
Mm.
very quickly, a very distilled version of that, right? So one of the arguments is that AI will, like a rising tide floats all boats, in the sense that if people have greater access to the average
Right.
viewpoint, that will raise everybody's performance, cognitive abilities, etc. That's like maybe not giving as much consideration into about the degradation of critical thinking skills by using the platforms, but sort of put that to a side. That's an interesting idea, but when you know where the training data comes from, which you already talked about,
Mm.
if it's generally this kind of Euro-American Western average viewpoint, and that's the thing we're going to give everyone access to, we are by definition creating a biased informational world,
Mm.
right? And it's not that that bias didn't exist, it actually has always existed on the internet, but it's way more accessible
Right.
using, Google AI search, right? It just immediately comes up. It's just more accessible. So I could see this actually making equity issues much worse, right? As opposed to some of the, bright siding of this is that we're gonna, just like they thought, like, the internet would democratize education, which
Right.
it didn't. People think this will democratize, intelligence, and I think the devil's in the details of what you mean by intelligence. If you mean like heteronormative Euro-American viewpoints, then yeah, then it will. But it's very biased.
Yeah, it's a little disheartening too because of where our perspective comes from in terms of really helping people identify the benefits of diversity in the workplace, right? Like you
Mm-hmm.
have the benefits of hiring such a diverse workforce and that being very proven as having so much strength and the diversity of perspectives being a predictor of productivity and innovation and weathering hard times because we have different skill sets. Like there's all these sort of ways in which having kind of like a spiky profile, if you will, in your people is helpful. And now we're just kind of taking all those peaks and sort of like settling them out and giving everybody the, middle answer, which, is very sad. And I want to raise another equity issue here, which I think is that automating certain tasks also creates hidden equity risks. So there are people in the workplace who are more impacted by AI and its use and certain tasks that are being automated or seen as automatable, even if they're not. So,
Mm-hmm.
some people are bearing the brunt of that disproportionately. Can you speak to that a little bit about who is seeing those impacts?
Really, just the tip of the iceberg. First is that you've got junior
Mm.
employees, right? Like, so people, the youth basically, who are looking for entry level jobs, they're being, or we're being told that they will be shut out, or it'll be harder. But I think it's currently harder because everybody is believing it's going to be harder.
Right.
But I'm not sure how long that is going to be around. So you've got that, which is kind of new. But then you have like most jobs that, craven CEOs want to automate are going to be these admin tasks,
Mhm.
other entry level tasks that are generally taken up by women, people from other equity deserving groups. Um, and so they're the first to, if this revolution happens,
Mhm.
they will be the first to suffer. And that's kind of the opposite of what, you know, the kind of society that we want to generally live in, right? Where it's like the people with the most need are the first people to get help, right? The first people to be supported. So I think that could be a big problem. I
Mhm.
think right now we're talking about, again, I think a lot of marketing,
Yep.
like, um, but if it does come to pass, these are going to be the problems
Yeah.
for equity issues in the workplace.
Yeah. I just think, whether it comes to pass or not, there is sort of a warning to leaders, or leaders should be considering who currently performs this work, what critical developmental skills do they gain from this work that will benefit the
Mm,
organization in the long term? And also, like, how does automation of some of these tasks shift power or opportunity in different groups in our team? Like, is it fair? Is it equitable? What are we losing when we take these tasks away? Like, is there a bunch of organizational wisdom that's going to walk out the door with people who are, quote unquote, replaced? So that I think there are some equity considerations, and obviously, the more we push on, full automation of entire roles, the more those concerns kind of come
Absolutely.
for. Yeah. So as we just come to a close, I want to ask you, as somebody who has a background in philosophy and adult learning, what is the single most important habit of mind that everyday workers need in the age of AI?
Um, you want me to boil it down to one?
Yeah.
I think the one thing is to educate yourself on how the technology actually works.
Hmm.
I think that's the single most freeing thing about AI. I have experienced that. I mean, I've always kind of had a interest in AI research, so I already kind of understood it. But when I really dug into how these current uh, generative tools create answers, it totally changed the way I interact with them.
Mm-hmm.
It just basically gave me a raised eyebrow, a perma raised eyebrow
Yeah.
for when I use them.
Yeah.
So I think that's a really important thing is just understand how it works and see how that perspective will change the way that you interact with them.
Yeah. That's so great. Thank you for that last word. I think it really sums up our conversation today, and it sort of speaks to why we've invested so much time in trying to educate people about critical thinking and the link to that and understanding AI and using it wisely. Um, yeah, Dr. Aaron Barth, thank you so much for talking with me about this today.
Yeah. Thanks for having me.
And if you'd like to hear more about Aaron's work, you can always follow him and or Dialectic on LinkedIn, or you can visit dialectic.solutions. And if you like what you're hearing on Just One Q, we deeply appreciate a quick follow or a review wherever you get your podcasts. I'm Dominique. Thanks so much for listening, and see you next time on Just One Q.